Hello, hello. My name is James McCool. I am the owner of paydirt.ghost.io, and I'm going to be doing some NFL DFS talk today. Specifically, we are going to be going over the Week 9 NFL DFS slate, going over how the models performed, going over how the slate in general went, going over how my personal lineups went. This is something that we do every Tuesday, so that we can have a little bit of accountability on how things went and how I am playing my own lineups and the advice that I'm giving out. And also to just kind of take some questions, talk to some subscribers, talk to some viewers, and get a little bit more knowledge overall about NFL DFS. If you have not already checked out paydirt.ghost.io, you should do that. It's only $25 a month, and it covers every single sport that you could possibly play. Discord community is a fantastic place to be, and we're going to go strong into some improvements for next year. But without further ado, let's kind of talk about NFL Week 9 overall. I'm going to pull up right now the Week 9 backlog. Anything that I put together does get backlogged into this folder, which is available to people in the Discord. So we'll pull up NFL Range of Outcomes Week 9 and kind of take a look at some things. There's running back ranges. Let's take a look at stacks. All right. So this, I think, was my cash game lineup. Yep, that looks like my cash game lineup. So that obviously worked out pretty well. But we'll talk about my lineups and some other stuff here in a little while. We're going to be taking a look at some things and trying to figure out what went right, what went wrong. Just looking at the stacks overall, having Seattle at the top and then Kansas City followed by that, and then Arizona and Buffalo, like, the stacks were fantastic, right? Russell Wilson to DK Metcalf was much better than Russell Wilson to Tyler Lockett, of course. But Patrick Mahomes, Travis Kelce had like 10 receptions for 175 yards or something. Travis Kelce or Tyreek Hill was not incredible, but Patrick Mahomes went nuclear. Kyler Murray put up, I think, the highest score of any quarterback on the slate, which is great. He did not do it with DeAndre Hopkins, though, which is a bummer because I did write about DeAndre Hopkins at linemovement.com. And so that kind of sucks. It's a little bit of a miss, but he did end up doing really, really well. Christian Kirk, I think, ended up catching a long touchdown. They were the best leverage play on the slate, 21% leverage score for them. Josh Allen and Stephon Diggs did plenty fine. You actually would have wanted to pair him with John Brown here instead of Cole Beasley. John Brown did end up doing pretty damn well as well. So, I mean, as far as like the top four, and then Houston is right here. Houston ended up doing really, really well. So, top four sacks, really good. Monday night slate was throw up emoji. Yeah, it was fucking disgusting, dude. Like, and everybody knew that it was going to be disgusting, right? I mean, it's New England and the New York Jets, who have the worst and second worst offenses in the league going into Week 9. There really wasn't much to expect in terms of fireworks there. I ended up doing okay in terms of showdown. I had Rashad Perryman at captain, so that was a spot that I really, really enjoyed, and I thought that it was going to be fun for GPPs, but it was, of course, as ugly of a game, of a real-life game as you could possibly find. Let's see what other things happen here. Had Drew Lock and this Denver stack looking like the best value overall. Percent chance to hit 5x their salary, 17%, just about. Bad leverage scores, though, and that was mostly from Noah Fant. It didn't really come from Jerry Judy. If you go over and you look at the overall ranges, and you sort LevX by ascending, you can see why Denver actually turned out to be a quote-unquote bad leverage stack. It was Noah Fant. There was just too much ownership on him for what his projection was and his percent chance to be a top 5 play on the slate. Jerry Judy also had a negative score. He didn't project especially well. He only projected for 11 fantasy points. So that stack didn't have a lot of leverage in terms of what you could gain from stacking it in GPPs. But, of course, garbage time exists, and Drew Lock ended up putting up, I think, 33 fantasy points or something like that, almost entirely thanks to garbage time against the Atlanta Falcons. So, that, I think, is probably the biggest miss, as I am just kind of, like, glancing at the stacks overall. Jake Luton to DJ Chark was something that I talked about. I did talk about Jake Luton at Line Movement, and I talked about it plenty in the Discord community as well. So I liked him because he was really cheap, and Jacksonville is a team that likes to pass in the red zone when you go and look at their red zone splits. If you sort this by expected passing touchdowns coming into the week, Jacksonville was sitting there at 1.49. They passed 68% of the time in the red zone. We're expected to have more passing touchdowns than Washington, Denver, Buffalo, Las Vegas. Some other teams that had quite a bit more ownership than Jacksonville did. So that's cool. I mean, that's a nice spot to be on a $4,900 quarterback that ends up putting up 25 fantasy points. So that's, I guess I considered that a little bit of a miss, having him this low. Dallas, I thought Dallas would put up a competitive game, but not actually put up fantasy points. Indianapolis was as bad as we expected them to be. New York as bad as they expected them to be. Miami was actually a bit of a surprise. Tua looked much better in this game. And this was kind of the test, right? Where they were going up against a team where they would actually have to pass and move the ball rather than just be able to rely on their defense. And this game did kind of test Tua. He looked really good on a couple drives. I am skeptical about Tua. I don't know that he's going to be a very good quarterback in real life, much less a very good fantasy quarterback. But we'll see. He has some of the same traits as like Drew Brees, but that was kind of the conversation when I was doing the pre-kickoff show over at Line Movement with Dieter and Pete Overzet. Like, really short quarterbacks don't usually find a lot of success. And people like to point to Drew Brees and Russell Wilson and Kyler Murray and be like, oh, well, these guys are great, so short quarterbacks can find success. And it's like, you can't point to Drew Brees as an example of something working, because Drew Brees is a historically great quarterback. You can't point to Russell Wilson, who's just a fucking magician. Like, you can't point to those guys and use them as an excuse to say that something works, because they are most of the time a exception to that rule. So I have my questions about Tua. I don't know how good he can actually be. I feel like he will just be a game manager, but he looked really good this week. Baltimore starting to look worse and worse, man. Last week's probably the last week that I can actually roster them. They have been just neutered on offense in terms of the way that they call plays is probably the largest reason why they have been so neutered. They are passing almost entirely between the 20s. They are not stretching the field down the sidelines. They are not letting Lamar Jackson move as much. They're trying to run the ball way too much. It's a team that kind of seems like when you see what the results are okay. Like, Lamar Jackson's averaging almost 20 fantasy points per game, which is fine, but it's not great. And, Marquis Brown, he was 6K last week. And he's not going to pay off 6K if they're only passing to him like 3 or 4 times, and he's not getting any air yards beneath it either, because they're just not passing deep. Lamar is doing a very good job. Like, they're winning games. They're 6-2. The team from a real life perspective is doing plenty fine. But the team from a fantasy perspective is not doing well at all. So that's a situation that I probably can't continue to roster Baltimore anymore. They're kind of like a watered down version of Buffalo this year, that's shitty. Like, it sucks to say, but they're a watered down version of Buffalo this year, and it's going to be hard to roster them moving forward. They're just until they are down there, till Lamar Jackson is like 6,500 and Mark Andrews is like 4K, Marquis Brown is like 4,500. You just really can't roster them. Ethan SQ, Baltimore killed me. Yeah, dude. It was one of my lineups. Like, we'll talk about my lineups too, but I had a Baltimore lineup, I had a Minnesota lineup, and I had what's my third lineup? Houston lineup. So I wanted to take one more shot at Baltimore, and I took my one more shot at Baltimore, and that is probably all that I'm going to be able to stomach for this year. I think I have rostered them 9 weeks straight. Came very close a couple weeks back to taking down the power sweep with them But that's probably going to be the closest that I get using them, I think. What other lineups here, or whatever stacks here, should we talk about? Minnesota, Kirk Cousins threw 2 touchdowns to Irv Smith Jr. They were his only 2 receptions in the game. He had 10 yards, 2 touchdowns. It was bullshit if you stacked Minnesota, like I did. Pittsburgh, Ben Roethlisberger is broken. Again, he's broken every year. But yeah, I mean, as far as like the stacks go and as far as the projections go and like the rankings of the stacks for GPPs, I think they all made sense. I think everything there happened the way that we expected it to. Let us go into the overall range really quick. Let's kind of look at the top median projections down, kind of get an idea of who worked out and who didn't. Dalvin Cook, awesome. I faded him purposely in GPPs. I leveraged him with Derrick Henry. Obviously, it did not work out, but that's a decision that you make so that you can pass large swaths of the field that are going to be 40% Dalvin Cook. I had him projected for 30. He ended up putting up like 43 or something as the highest owned player on the slate, which, shitty, but it is what it is. Kyler Murray had him projected highly. He paid off very well. Josh Allen paid off very well. Russell Wilson paid off very well. Deshaun Watson paid off very well. So, yeah, top 5 guys all did what they were supposed to do. But there's 4 quarterbacks there, right? DeAndre Hopkins is the first big miss. Hopkins did not do jack shit. He was not targeted very often at all in that Arizona game. It's kind of a weird game, and I'm excited to run numbers for the air yards and opportunity search tools. But like going into that game, if you look at DeAndre Hopkins has been one of the most consistent wide receivers in the league in terms of the yards per target, in terms of his target counts, in terms of his red zone usage, like fantasy points. He's averaging 19 fantasy points per game. But he does have these letdown games, which is something that you don't get from some of the other very elite options. So that's something to pay attention to when you have a rushing quarterback like Kyler Murray. There are these opportunities where your points per touch are going to go way down. And it just happens because Kyler can do so much in so many other ways. But going into this game, obviously, he was an absolute just monster. Yeah, he was part of the 31-31 club, which is 30+% of the air yards and 30+% of the targets for the team. Nearly 20% of the red zone targets. ADOT was fine. PBR points fine. Like, he looked awesome going into that game, and it just didn't end up getting there, which it is what it is. After him, Derrick Henry. Derrick Henry, I think, had like 30 touches or something. He just didn't end up breaking a big run, which is what he needs to do in order to meet his ceiling. Patrick Mahomes crushed it. Again, quarterback. Very easy to project quarterbacks this week. Tyler Lockett was a letdown. He ended up taking a backseat to DK Metcalf. He was the cheaper option. He was by far the more owned option over DK Metcalf. Lamar Jackson, I think, put up 19 fantasy points off the top of my head, so pretty bad, but was only 6,900. It was a pretty big discount on him. Keenan Allen was great. Julio Jones was okay. He did get a touchdown taken back, so that's a bit of a bummer. Christian McCaffrey. Let's talk about Christian McCaffrey a little bit. People did not want to play him because they thought that Mike Davis was going to steal touches. That's asinine. I said that it was asinine all week. Like, you have Christian McCaffrey, who is the face of the Carolina Panthers. He is a very, very highly paid running back. He was coming off of an injury where obviously they're going to be very cautious with the face of their franchise. And you think that they're not going to give him the full complement of like important snaps when they're in a game that is competitive. Like, yeah, I can see if they're salting away a 30-point lead against like a bottom-feeding team like New York Jets or something like that. Yeah, sure, maybe they're going to give Mike Davis a series or two. And we maybe need to pay attention to blowout potential with him moving forward. But against the Kansas City Chiefs, like, you're telling me they are going to march down the field, get inside the red zone, and they're going to end up using Mike Davis instead of Christian frickin' McCaffrey? That's not going to happen. I think Christian McCaffrey ended up having like 7, or Mike Davis ended up having like 7 touches. It might have even been 7 opportunities. Christian McCaffrey ran away with nearly all of the work, had a huge performance, and people didn't want to play him because they thought that he was going to cede snaps to Mike Davis. Just silly. People are silly. And then Stephon Diggs did well, and Josh Jacobs did pretty badly. So of the top 15, and then Chase Edmonds, everybody had Chase Edmonds projected well. He touched the ball 26 times. You can't do anything about that. Like you got the volume that you wanted to get from him. You got the usage that you wanted to get from him. He just ended up not producing. The last guy that I kind of wanted to touch on was Justin Jackson, who I think I had projected pretty decently. Maybe I didn't. Yeah, I had him project for 16. He got injured at the very beginning of the game, and then just like ended up not playing. So I can't do anything about that. He was way higher owned than I thought that he was going to be. I kind of talked about it in the community, in the Discord, that I kind of figured that he was going to be like 20% owned or something. He ended up being like 45% owned, and he was great value. Like I was on him. I think I had 100% of him, and I ended up actually swapping off of him to Joshua Kelly, which we'll talk about when we get to my lineups here in a second. But he was a really, really good play, so it just didn't pay off. All right, let's get over into my lineups here. I'll just pull up DraftKings. But if you guys have questions, like, feel free to just type them into the chat. I'm trying to be a little bit more laid back about this one today. I didn't take any subscriber lineups or anything like that, so we're just going to really be talking about the slate, talking about my lineups, talking about why I did the things that I did. I do have a couple questions that I'm going to answer from some subscribers, but for the most part, just kind of hanging out, talking about what went right, and what went wrong. Let's see. Showdown. There it is. Show only mine. All right. So let's talk about these. My best scoring lineup was a Houston stack. It was Deshaun Watson with Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks. Brought it back with DJ Chark. That is a fantastic core. That's cool. First play or the first drive of the game, DJ Chark has like a 70-yard touchdown. Next drive of the game for Houston, Brandon Cooks has a 55-yard touchdown. Things started out great. Things did not continue great, though. That stack did very, very well. Deshaun Watson, 24 fantasy points, 281 passing yards. If that game goes into overtime, like, that stack gets even better. Deshaun Watson gets the 300-yard bonus. Brandon Cooks has a chance to get the 100-yard bonus. That's probably, I don't know, at least, like, let's call it like 8 fantasy points more. Just between those two, like maybe 9. And that's not even considering touchdowns or anything like that. Brought back DJ Chark, who was fantastic. He's been kind of like an air yards darling. If you go over into the air yards search tool, which is not updated for this week, but if you look at DJ Chark, like he is the air yards for that team. Averages 30%, but that's with these two duds in week 1 and week 2. If you just take week 4 through week 7, this is an average of like well over 40. So he looks like a spot where he's always going to be the air yard darling. He is by far the wide receiver 1 for this team. He gets red zone targets, 26% of the red zone targets as well. His ADOT is good. Like the fact that he's only averaging 12.18 fantasy points, he's a huge buy low. Even with Jake Luton at quarterback. I don't know if Jake Luton is going to be good. I haven't reran numbers on him yet, but DJ Chark, just good play week in and week out. I paired this with a secondary stack of Mark Andrews and Zack Pascal. I liked, like I said, that there was a discount on Mark Andrews. There's a discount on Baltimore overall. I want to take one more shot on them, say, all right, they know that their offense is lacking. Marquis Brown is going to Twitter and complaining and saying that he's not getting enough targets. Like, this team is going to turn on the gas. They didn't turn on the gas. And because they didn't necessarily need to turn on the gas, Indianapolis didn't really need to do too much either. Like, Indianapolis looked bad, for sure. They were not able to really do anything against Baltimore. So Zack Pascal, even though he was the wide receiver 1 in that game for that team, he still ended up only putting up 10.5 fantasy points, which wouldn't have been the worst thing in the world, right? I played him because I knew this stack was going to be low owned, but Mark Andrews only putting up 5.2 fantasy points. He is touchdown reliant. He's not really a volume guy. So if he doesn't get a touchdown, he's not going to really get you there anymore. Like last year he could, but he can't do it this year. I also had, like I said, this originally was Justin Jackson and Derrick Henry. So as soon as Dalvin Cook started doing Dalvin Cook things, I went into each one of my lineups, and where I could, because I had Justin Jackson here and I had Justin Jackson here, I swapped out all of my Justin Jackson as soon as Dalvin Cook started going off. And the reason for that is because I knew that with Derrick Henry only having 68 rushing yards and like not doing what he needed to do as a direct pivot to Dalvin Cook, I knew that I needed leverage on the field, and I knew that Justin Jackson was going to end up being higher owned than I thought. I looked around. I saw there were a lot of people that had that running back spot open going into those later games. Made a lot of sense that it was either going to be Chase Edmonds or Justin Jackson, so just kind of like looking through and reviewing the lineups in the power sweep, I was finding that they didn't quite have enough money for Chase Edmonds, so I was like, all right, Justin Jackson's going to be really high owned. So I swapped off Justin Jackson onto Joshua Kelly. And that's something that you guys should be doing when you are kind of drawing dead, right? Like you kind of know in the first half of the games, I always tell the community not to tilt, and you shouldn't tilt, but you should be paying attention. If you're fading Dalvin Cook like I was this week, and you see that Dalvin Cook has 22 fantasy points in the first half, like you're dead in the water for the most part. You're going to have to find leverage somewhere else, and you're going to have to make up the field somewhere else. So if you have another really popular play that is playing in the later games, like say you had Chase Edmonds, and you had enough money to get up from Chase Edmonds to James Conner. Chase Edmonds was projected to be like 30% owned. James Conner was projected to be like 5% owned. They likely had about the same median outcome. Chase Edmonds a bit higher of a ceiling, but like you make that swap over to James Conner, because if you don't make that swap, then you're not going to be gaining any points on the field. You would need James Conner in order to pass enough people to actually cash that GPP. And you just need to make sure that you're feeling reticent about your lineups. If you only make 3 lineups like I do each and every week, like it's very easy for me to manage that kind of thing. It's very easy for me to look at what options I have to late swap to into later contests if I know that I'm drawing dead. It works the other way. Like if Dalvin Cook ends up shitting the bed and doing what Derrick Henry did and only putting up 68 rushing yards, and Derrick Henry instead has 23 or 24 fantasy points at half, then, I'm going to start looking at this and I'm going to start trying to find ways to be more with the field later on. I'm going to be looking for ways to block people that are trying to pass me. Just because I know that I have enough leverage on the field in that Derrick Henry did what people thought that Dalvin Cook was going to do. I now know that if I had Joshua Kelly here, or if I had like Tony Pollard or something like that, I should swap to Justin Jackson if I can, because he's going to be really popular. That way people who also have Justin Jackson can't pass me if they had Dalvin Cook. So it gives me a better chance to have a better finish later on. It's just one of those things that you really need to pay attention to. You usually wait until halfway through the third quarter to start looking into my late swap options. Yeah. As long as you're looking at it, it depends on how many lineups you have, right? I have 3 lineups. I want to start thinking about that stuff early, just because I need to know what I'm looking for. And I also like to swap my lineups. So for me, I like to start looking at about halftime. Obviously, anything can happen in 2 quarters. Pretty much shouldn't sweat things until about the 4th quarter anyway. But if you're tilting something and you say, oh, well, I'm dead, it's like, okay, well, if you acknowledge that you are dead in a contest, you should be doing everything that you can to, at the very least, min cash. Like, swapping to Joshua Kelly when I have Derrick Henry and everybody else has Dalvin Cook doesn't give me a chance to win the GPP. Like, I was dead in this GPP as soon as Derrick Henry did not do anything close to what Dalvin Cook did. Even if they were close, like, I still have a chance at least if I swap to Joshua Kelly and everybody has Justin Jackson. But knowing that Derrick Henry was not going to match Dalvin Cook, switching to Joshua Kelly here is just me looking to min cash, to like try to pick up some losses. If Joshua Kelly has a 30 fantasy point game and Justin Jackson ends up getting injured, then like maybe I min cash. And that's cool. Like that is the goal. The goal is to try to make as much money as you possibly can every single slate, even if it's not winning the slate. So if you build the way that I do, which is very contrarian, and that's the way that I teach people to play, and you know that your main leverage, that like the main player that you were trying to leverage with your lineups ended up doing much better than your lineups possibly can, time to try it's Operation Min Cash, which is what I call it. Just Operation Min Cash. Make sure that you're doing everything that you can to maybe cash a lineup, which pays dividends over time. Like I had a very, very good week in cash, and we'll talk about that. But I made up like 75, I think 80% profit in cash. So I ended up dropping about 20% on the slate or so, simply because my GPP lineups, none of them cashed. If I cash one of them, I end up at least breaking even. If I cash two of them, I end up making profit. And so this swap to Joshua Kelly over Justin Jackson, like I don't think that I was anywhere near the cash line, really. I was 14 points back from the cash line. But if Joshua Kelly ends up putting up 25 fantasy points, like I find the cash line and I end up having a profitable week instead of having a negative week. But that never would have happened. I never would have had a chance for that to work if I keep Justin Jackson in this lineup. Last thing, Washington football team. I had them 100%. They were my defense. I think the Giants suck, so that was a pretty easy one. Defense is kind of like I always just pick defense last, so I don't really care about what defense I pick. I'll go off of in the sheets. I'll go to the defense ranks and I'll just kind of look down. I'll say, all right, well, what defense is pretty cheap and it gives me a pretty good route to success? Oh, okay, the Washington football team rates pretty well. Large discrepancy in price between DraftKings and FanDuel. The Giants defense is right here too, but whatever. I have enough money for the football team, so I'm just going to do it. I couldn't upgrade anywhere else, so I just felt like I'd just go with the Washington defense. But this was the Houston sack. It was pretty good. Pretty good, all things considered. If Derrick Henry has a normal game, I end up cashing. If Joshua Kelly ends up putting up 25, I end up cashing. If Mark Andrews ends up catching a touchdown, I'm pretty close to cashing. So there's a lot of ways here that this could have gone right. If Derrick Henry has the game that Dalvin Cook had, this lineup ends up looking really, really good, placing pretty high in GPPs, even with Mark Andrews putting up a dud. Another lineup that I had. This is the Baltimore lineup. Yay, cool. We get to talk about this lineup now. Lamar Jackson with Marquis Brown and no secondary. I brought it back with Marcus Johnson. I did have a secondary correlation of Travis Kelce with Robbie Anderson. I used Derrick Henry. I had 100% Derrick Henry. So I used Derrick Henry, and with this one, I used Adrian Peterson. Mike Williams was originally Justin Jackson, which, again, I switched to Mike Williams, trying to look for upside so that I could maybe have a possibility of cashing this lineup. Again, didn't happen, but is what it is. Like, you got to make those switches. Great lineup, honestly. In another universe, that takes home first. Yeah, I mean, and that's all that I can do. Like, I can just try to build lineups to have a chance to take down GPPs. What happens, I don't have any control over what happens. Like, predicting the future is really, really hard, but, like, it is what it is. Like, you build lineups that have a chance to take down a GPP, and that's all you can do. So, yeah, exactly. This lineup. So, yeah, Lamar Jackson with Marquis Brown. I was kind of saying, all right, well, Marquis Brown is complaining that he's not getting enough targets. He's not getting enough work. We know that Baltimore is looking a bit down. The coaching staff knows they look down. Lamar Jackson is complaining. Marquis Brown is complaining. Like, these guys are complaining. Hopefully they turn off the gas. I said in the Discord, like, verbatim, I'm taking one more shot on them. I have ridden them. They always project well. They are always going to project well. But at this point, I'm going to have to start cutting down their projections a bit because they're just not playing aggressively. They're not playing in a way that is good for fantasy. They're playing in a way that's good for winning real life games, which is fine. Like, do your thing, Baltimore Ravens. You're 6-2, great football team. Not great for fantasy at this point. Or at least they have not been. They have a really easy schedule. Like, I'm sure that I'm going to talk myself into a Ravens stack at some point. But it's been really, really bad. Lamar Jackson and Marquis Brown combined for 25.4 fantasy points. Lamar Jackson had less than 200 passing yards, did have 58 rushing yards. I had him projected for like 60, so that makes sense. Marquis Brown, only 3 receptions and 38 yards. I brought it back with Marcus Johnson, Marcus Johnson, I kind of go back and forth on him. It kind of seemed like he gets plenty of snaps and he had decent air yards in week 8, decent targets. Like they were about his averages. His ADOT is good. He has an average ADOT of 17.63. Like he is a deep ball receiver. That was playing about 62% of the snaps. And then you had T.Y. Hilton, who wasn't going to play, and it just kind of made sense to use a cheap wide receiver. That being said, the only reason why I used him here is because I wanted to utilize a secondary Kansas City Carolina stack. And that secondary stack was Travis Kelce and Robbie Anderson. Like, that's an expensive secondary stack. So it just likely wasn't going to happen unless I used some value with Marcus Johnson. This stack was fine. Like Robbie Anderson's 9 receptions for 63 yards, 15 fantasy points, scores a touchdown, 20 plus fantasy points. Cool. I'd have been fine with that. Travis Kelce, 159 yards on 10 receptions. Great. Killed it. Travis Kelce is the best fantasy tight end in the league by a million points. I already talked about Derrick Henry as direct pivot off of Dalvin Cook, but then I took it one step farther and also had Adrian Peterson. And like I kind of talked about this in the community, but the reason for Adrian Peterson this week was specifically that the only way that Dalvin Cook ends up not doing well, like that there were 2 routes to Derrick Henry not doing well. 2 routes. The 2 routes were the Minnesota passing game scores all the points, and Dalvin Cook only ends up getting rushing yards. So basically what happened with Derrick Henry. And in that case, a Minnesota stack does very well. Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, and Adam Thielen, or Kirk Cousins, Adam Thielen, and Justin Jefferson end up doing very well. The other way that Dalvin Cook ended up not getting there, in my mind, was if that offense just sucked. If the Vikings could not move the ball very well at all, if they were getting stuffed consistently, like if they just sucked. And in that case, the prime beneficiary was going to be the running game for Detroit. Now, most people are using DeAndre Swift at this point, but DeAndre Swift and Adrian Peterson don't actually look that different. Yes, I agree that DeAndre Swift is the better running back. He does get the more high-value touches. But all things considered, Adrian Peterson is averaging 10.5 rushing attempts per game. DeAndre Swift, 8.25. Adrian Peterson still getting a target per game. DeAndre Swift getting 4.25. Yeah, the points per touch, for sure. It's on DeAndre Swift. But the other thing going for Adrian Peterson here is that he was going up against the Vikings. And while I don't necessarily believe in narratives, I do believe that there are certain players in certain instances that will want to, quote unquote, stick it to a team. Adrian Peterson was, the face of the Vikings forever. So I wanted to utilize him in this spot instead of DeAndre Swift. I knew that he would be very, very low owned. But I also knew that this was a situation where if the Vikings could not move the ball at all, it was going to be Adrian Peterson that was getting the salt away carries. He was cheap. It made it work. It was great direct leverage and indirect leverage with Derrick Henry and Adrian Peterson. So, it makes sense. It's fine. Was it a long shot? For sure. But I thought that it made sense in terms of the leverage that I was getting on Dalvin Cook. You will notice that all 3 of these lineups are leveraging Dalvin Cook, because we'll talk about the Minnesota stack here in a sec. Last thing that I guess I can touch on is Mike Williams. Like I said, again, this is Justin Jackson. I knew this lineup was dead as soon as Dalvin Cook was crushing. So I just switched to Mike Williams. And the reason why I switched to Mike Williams specifically is because I was in the flex. And Mike Williams absolutely has a higher ceiling than Joshua Kelly. Like, in this lineup, if I could have had Mike Williams instead of Joshua Kelly, I would have. In this lineup, if I could have done that, I absolutely would have. But I couldn't. So it is what it is. This lineup ended up putting up 105 points, which not great, but I don't care. Like, I'm not building these lineups to cash. I'm building them to win. So if they crash and burn, then it is what it is. Last GPP lineup is a Minnesota stack. So this is Kirk Cousins with Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. I brought it back with TJ Hawkinson. I had a secondary correlation stack of Robbie Anderson and Demarcus Robinson. I had talked a lot about liking Kansas City and that Carolina environment. I decided to go about it with secondary stacks instead of stacking Kansas City overall. I thought the Kansas City was really, really expensive. It didn't really allow me to comfortably fit Derrick Henry the way that I wanted it to, so I figured that I would just utilize them as secondary stacks. I like Demarcus Robinson. He has been getting plenty of snaps. He didn't get quite as many snaps this last week, I don't think. Him and Mecole Hardman are kind of in a weird spot here where they're eating into each other a little bit, but for the most part, Demarcus Robinson, I thought, made a fine play in GPPs, especially if you brought it back with a Carolina player. He is somebody who has big game potential. He's a lot like Mike Williams. They like using him as a backup to Sammy Watkins. So for 3,200 in a game environment that I thought had a great chance to shoot out, yeah, Demarcus Robinson, fine play. I utilized TJ Hawkinson instead of Marvin Jones Jr. for a couple reasons. One, that I could use TJ Hawkinson in the tight end spot, which is a premium spot to utilize, especially if you're doing it with your correlations. Like, I think that it's really important to correlate your tight end with the rest of your lineup and not be using one-offs. Tight end has been a flaming dumpster fire this year. It's just not been a good spot. So utilizing it in your correlations is really important to me right now. Used Adam Thielen, Justin Jefferson, and I mean, Justin Jefferson, 3 receptions for 64 yards, but Irv Smith fucking Jr. with 2 touchdowns on 2 receptions on 2 targets. Just ran like God. And there are a couple of people that used him and were like, oh yeah, did you? Yeah, Irv Smith, I called it. It's like, sure you did. He ended up just stealing away any real upside that this leverage stack could have. Kirk Cousins, fine. 3 passing touchdowns, 220 passing yards. But Detroit couldn't keep up at all, which is shitty. That's not great. So, overall, like I talked about all the other pieces to this lineup, but this one specifically was direct leverage on Dalvin Cook, where if Dalvin Cook isn't scoring points, it's because either there are no points being scored or the Minnesota passing game is scoring them for him. Paired it with Derrick Henry. If this lineup goes really, really well, if Kirk Cousins throws 2 touchdowns to Adam Thielen and 1 long one to Justin Jefferson, and Derrick Henry ends up crushing, this lineup passes so much of the field, it's not even funny. And that's always the goal. Do I care at all to prioritize flex being a late game player? Absolutely, if I can. But that's kind of rare for me. The only way that I am able to do it is when I have a lineup like this, where if I skinny stack, like if I have like Lamar Jackson with Marquis Brown, or if I have Josh Allen with Stephon Diggs, or one of these rushing quarterbacks, it makes it a lot easier on me, because then I know that I can have this correlation right here with these 3 players, and then I can have this correlation right here, and then I can have my running backs, and then I can have a flex player that's in the later games. A situation like this, right, where because I double stacked, like developing correlation here outside of using the flex spot for the correlation with Robbie Anderson, it kind of makes it a little bit more difficult. So I prefer to use the flex spot for a late game player if I can. You should almost always be doing that. It's GPP kind of like 101. That way you give yourself as many outs as possible. Like with this lineup, I had to go with Joshua Kelly because I didn't have Justin Jackson in the flex spot. With this lineup, I was able to go Mike Williams. It didn't end up being a massive difference, but like if Mike Williams ends up catching one more like 40-yard touchdown here and ends up with 121 yards, 6 receptions, and a touchdown. He puts up 25 fantasy points. That's a huge difference between him and Joshua Kelly. So always make sure to try to prioritize late game players in the flex spot. It doesn't always happen. It can't always happen. There are certain lineups that just don't allow it. But yeah, you should generally be trying to, for sure. All right, let's bring up my cash game lineup. This cash game lineup was the tits this week. Like I said, I ended up winning like 75, 80% or something like that in cash. Let's bring it up against, I don't know, this person, whatever. All right. So I am on the left here, and Giant Octopus put up 131 points. But I'll answer this question before I get into this. Do you think that the two Minnesota receivers are negatively correlated? I'm scared to play them together, but usually they're reasonably priced to stack, so it's tempting. Yeah, so I mean, you can go into both the opportunity search and the air yard search, and you can take a look at that. Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson. So, like, yeah, when you look at, I think that this is almost a Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf situation, but these two are never going to be as expensive as DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. So it kind of gives you like DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett being as expensive as they are. And we had this conversation back in the community in the Discord. I don't know, it might've been this week, where we were talking about if a high priced combo of wide receivers on the same team can win you a GPP. And the question is not, can they win you a GPP? Of course they can. The question is, does it allow you enough things around them to where you can pay for the upside of both wide receivers? Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen, I don't think are really negatively correlated. Like this game, I think that when you look at it, you have to kind of take into account that Justin Jefferson is kind of still a budding offense or budding reason in this offense. But I think that because they have such drastically different yards per target, that's kind of what I use as a determining factor between two wide receivers. I want wide receivers that run different routes because that's really what separates two wide receivers from being like quote unquote negatively correlated. If one wide receiver like Adam Thielen is running consistently shorter targets and is running consistently different targets, like Adam Thielen running like slants or running 15 or 10 yard ins or like 10 yard outs or something like that, and Justin Jefferson is constantly running slant and goes and post routes and streaks and nines and stuff like that, those two are not negatively correlated because they're getting targets in different ways and they're not really eating into the production that the other one can provide. So there are going to be games where, like even with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett can have a game where he has 10 targets and gets 9 receptions and 116 yards and a touchdown. And DK Metcalf ends that same game with 6 targets, 150 yards, and 2 touchdowns. Like, those two aren't necessarily negatively correlated. It's just that there has to be a large amount of passing yards, and they have to not eat into the production of the other. Same thing, I think, with Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, where Justin Jefferson is running much deeper routes, and he is the one that's kind of like the flyer on the offense, and Adam Thielen is more the possession receiver. You saw it with Jarvis, Landry, and Odell Beckham Jr. Like, Jarvis Landry was consistently getting you anywhere between 17 and 19 fantasy points, 16 to 19 fantasy points last year. And OBJ was the one who had like the 30, 35 plus fantasy point potential. But people would look at them and they'd say, oh, well, Jarvis Landry is finding success when OBJ isn't. And it's like, no, they just like, it's really hard to catch lightning in a bottle, and player props in and of themselves and trying to predict when a wide receiver is going to have 100 plus yards or a touchdown or whatever is inherently difficult anyway. So I don't think that these two are negatively correlated. I don't even think that Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf are negatively correlated. I just think that it's hard for them both to find their ceilings. You have to have a game environment that allows it. We saw the game environment that allowed it for Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen back with Atlanta against Minnesota, right? Where Justin Jefferson, like, yeah, he ended up with 37 fantasy points. Adam Thielen had 14. I think that this is two extremes of the same coin. This game could have ended with Justin Jefferson with one less touchdown and Adam Thielen with one more touchdown, and they end up with, both having 20 fantasy point outcomes. It's just that there are only 17 weeks in a season, so you get less opportunities to see those things kind of unfold. So it's not that they're negatively correlated, it's just the game environment has to be correct, and if you are going to play the game environment to hope that it's going to be correct, like, if you're going to use Kirk Cousins, you should be using both of these guys, because Kirk Cousins winning a GPP is going to come from throwing 4 touchdowns, and that's probably going to come to Justin Jefferson and Adam Thielen and maybe Irv Smith catching all 4 on 4 targets. Same thing with Matt Ryan. Like, you play Calvin Ridley and Julio Jones together because for Matt Ryan to win you a GPP, he has to throw 4 or 5 touchdowns. I just think that a lot of people kind of get gun-shy about it. And if you're only going to pair like Kirk Cousins with one of Adam Thielen or Justin Jefferson, just use Justin Jefferson or Adam Thielen as a secondary stack with whatever team you're facing, because you don't actually think that Kirk Cousins is going to win you a GPP. And if Kirk Cousins isn't going to win you a GPP, he didn't throw for enough yardage, he didn't throw for enough touchdowns to support 2 wide receivers. So just use one and use it as a secondary stack. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. You just need to understand the thresholds and like the way that you can actually win GPPs. So when it comes down to it, if you're going to use a quarterback, you're using 2 wide receivers or 2 of his receivers. In the case of like Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill, you don't use Patrick Mahomes with just one of them. You don't use Matt Ryan with just Julio Jones. You use him with another wide receiver as well. Just because that's the way that is most likely going to lead to you having a score that can take down a GPP. Again, it's just about putting yourself in position to pay off. It's not about like actually winning and projecting and predicting the future. It's just about playing ways that put you in a position to win GPPs if things go the way that you need them to go. So I hope that answers the question. Let's break down my cash game lineup here. I just played a bunch of chalk. I showed you guys what it was here. I'll show you again. So basically what I did was you can see that the ownership projections are really, really high for this lineup, right? Like Dalvin Cook, 30%. Justin Jackson ended up being like 40%. Tyler Lockett, 20%. Keenan Allen, 20%. Noah Fant was projected to be the highest owned tight end. Chase Edmonds, projected to be very, very high owned. So basically, this lineup was just like play as much chalk as possible, and that's what I do every single week. This week was difficult, though, and I will explain that here in a second. Yeah, for sure. Always have to explain. It's easier for me to talk through it than type that all out in the community. So if you're a part of the community and you have wanted that explanation, then there you go. I hope that you guys like this video. So the way that I did this is I started with Dalvin Cook, Justin Jackson, and Chase Edmonds. I almost always use 3 running backs in cash, and it just so happened to be that it just made a lot of sense to use those 3 in cash this week. I started with Dalvin Cook. I wasn't going to build any cash game lineups without Dalvin Cook. I was not going to start any cash game lineups without Chase Edmonds. I also used Justin Jackson because at 4,900, like cheap running backs that are getting as much opportunity as he was slated to get just makes sense. I then plugged in Keenan Allen. And Keenan Allen before I plugged in Tyler Lockett specifically, because Keenan Allen, like, you look at Keenan Allen, and he's just like, he is the best cash game wide receiver that you can possibly have right now. Averaging nearly 11 targets per game, 25% of the red zone targets, averaging 20 fantasy points per game, 3 fantasy points per touch. Like, yeah, 3 fantasy points per touch isn't massive, but when you're getting 11 targets, it is. You have like a baseline of like 20 fantasy points at that point. So you go to Keenan Allen in cash. Then I put in Tyler Lockett. So let's kind of like, let's look at that really quick of what that left me. Because it wasn't much. And you can do this, of course, like when you go into the backlogs in the Discord, which I have pinned to the Discord, you can go in and you can play around with this. So I started with this, and this was just like, I know that I'm going to play this in cash. The problem is that it only left me with $4,075 remaining per player. I then went with Noah Fant, which, again, just made sense. Highest owned tight end. He was a very negative LevX play, but like he was the play that you made in cash because he was going to be the highest owned tight end by a lot. So then I only have 3,900. It's like, okay, I need to figure out how I can fit all of this. And the first answer here is to go with Drew Lock at quarterback. And the reason why you go Drew Lock at quarterback is not necessarily because you think that Drew Lock is good. I only had him projected for 20 fantasy points. Like, it wasn't massive. But one, you get to pair it with Noah Fant, which you don't force correlations in cash because it's not necessary. But like when it presents itself, then it's fine. Two, he was only 5,200. And 5,200 for a quarterback is not something that you get to see very often anymore. And the old adage in cash games was always to pay down at quarterback. Like, that is something that you should do the vast majority of the time. And like when you went and you looked at the ownerships for QBs, all of these guys were going to be really, really expensive and really high owned, right? Like Josh Allen at 7K, 13%. Russell Wilson at 7,600, 12%. 7,100 for Deshaun Watson. Like, I knew that I was not going to be able to fit any of those guys. It just, like, the math didn't work out when you're trying to build out this lineup. If you're going to be getting the highest owned players, which is what I try to do, you had to make a concession somewhere. And Drew Lock, I thought, at a very cheap price. I thought that he was actually going to be higher owned than he was. He was not that high owned, which I was surprised by. Fit with Noah Fant, it was fine. But that still dropped me down to 3,200 remaining per player. So I knew I was going to have to punt this as well. This was probably like one of the only concessions that I have really made all year in cash games in terms of not playing a player, or in terms of playing a player that I knew distinctly would not be chalk. And this is something that I try to avoid in cash games this year. And I've had great success in cash games. I'm winning 67% of my head-to-heads so far in the year. This is the one player so far this year that I have actively said, all right, he's not going to be chalk, but like I just have to do it. I don't have a choice if I want to get the players that are going to be very popular and have good projections and like are cash game plays. It was a necessary punt to make. That ended up giving me the Texans defense, which also ended up being very popular. They were projected to be the highest owned defense, I think. Yeah, 17% owned. So I was fine with that, 3,100. Like, knowing that this one concession here made the rest of my chalk lineup work was the difference for me in all of my cash games. I ended up crushing cash games because Drew Lock put up 33, Dalvin Cook crushed. Justin Jackson even put up 0 fantasy points, and I still dominated because he was like 90% owned in cash games. Tyler Lockett didn't do great. Keenan Allen, 30 fantasy points, something like that. But this combination right here of these three players is the reason why I was able to crush so many people, because so many people took Josh Allen, which made it so that they had to take the concession of David Johnson, or they had to take the concession of Marcus Johnson. Like, when you're able to pay down at quarterback, you're able to secure more valuable players at more volatile positions. Tyler Lockett was going to be really popular. Marcus Johnson was going to be popular in cash. David Johnson was going to be popular in cash. But David Johnson is not a better play than Dalvin Cook. Marcus Johnson is not a better play than Keenan Allen, you know? I could have played Marcus Johnson over Demarcus Robinson, but I thought that, Demarcus Robinson was in a better spot. So those are the kind of concessions that you make. Like, when you start, and this isn't really the best example because this dude played a lot of, like, this is honestly a shitty cash game lineup. This dude took Josh Jacobs, who was not supposed to be super popular, like kind of popular, but not super popular. Took Marcus Johnson, he took Julio Jones, he took a wide receiver in the flex who was projected to be popular again, but like, it's just, you don't make this concession when Dalvin Cook is going to be like the chalk. You can't do that. in cash games, you have to start with who's going to be the highest owned player because you have to block people. Like, the goal in cash games is not to score the most points. The goal in cash games is literally just let other people make mistakes. I let this guy make a lot of mistakes because I just took as many of the popular plays as I could. But this one concession of Demarcus Robinson and dropping down to Drew Lock instead of taking a really expensive quarterback, this is kind of a best practice lesson that can be learned. If you have the opportunity to pay down a quarterback, you should pay down a quarterback. Even with high-priced quarterbacks doing very, very well this year, if you have an opportunity like Drew Lock or like Jake Luton was $4,900. I considered him in cash too, because at $4,900, you just don't get quarterbacks that are that cheap. Quarterbacks' range of outcomes is much skinnier than other players. They're much less volatile, and they're much higher. Wide receivers have, in general, a floor that is anywhere between 0 and 5 fantasy points. Quarterbacks have a floor that is anywhere between at least like 8 to 13 or something like that. So being able to pay down a quarterback, being able to punt this position, and being able to just mainline chalk, get Dalvin Cook, get Keenan Allen, get Tyler Lockett together, that was a huge differentiator for me in cash. And they were lessons to be taught there in terms of like why I made that concession. So overall, how were things this week? I did okay. Like I ended up losing about 20%, but when I whiff on all of my GPP lineups, and I crush cash, like I'll take that. That's kind of a situation where I am happy to lose those GPP lineups because my cash games did so well, and I know that I put my GPP lineups in a position where if things go the way that I want them to go, and the way that I need them to go, then I'm gonna get paid really, really well. So I thought this week, a lot of things made sense. Dalvin Cook crushing was easily foreseeable, but at the same time, like you had to make that fade for me. I had to make that fade. Derrick Henry was a letdown, but next week, maybe it's different. Maybe the 50% owned player only gets 6 fantasy points and the 9% owned one gets 50. That's why you make those changes. So I hope that you guys had an okay week. It's going to be going into week 10. I'm pretty excited for that. I've been building some college football projections as well, which I'm going to monitor over the next couple days. So you guys can look forward to that if you're part of the community. And just going to start getting ramped up for basketball. So thank you so much for tuning in. I appreciate you guys. If you're not a subscriber over at paydirt.ghost.io, go do that. $25 a month for every sport, and the best community in all of DFS, like of any community that I've ever been a part of. I'm very proud of what's been built over there. So thank you guys so much. I appreciate the support, and I will talk to you guys in a couple days for the recipe for success.